Ladies and gentlemen, could you all please take your seats? It is now 7 o'clock, so we need to make a start. Thank you. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome tonight. To introduce myself, I'm Kay Baker, and I am a trustee here at the South of England Agricultural Society, and I am delighted to have been asked to host tonight. If I can just start with the very boring housekeeping. If the fire alarm goes off, it is not a dress rehearsal, it is the real thing, so please leave by one of the appropriate exits. And please either turn off or silence your mobile phone, because nobody wants to do the mobile phone walk of shame tonight. So I'd like to start by welcoming you all here tonight. We have around 250 people registered to be in the room with us tonight, and over 220 people joining us online. So we are delighted with the attendance. This clearly shows that there is a strong need for those involved in farming and in the rural community to come together, to debate, to listen, but more importantly, actually just to be together with each other on a social basis so that we can chat and exchange views and ideas. So we have to thank the Society for putting this conference on, which gives us all an opportunity to be together in one room on a dark November evening. We will be recording this session, and it is being streamed on our YouTube account. So if you are putting this on social media this evening, please tag us, #FarmingConference or @SouthIngShows. If you are joining us via Zoom, you cannot be seen or heard on the screen, but please type your questions into the Q&A box, and these will be picked up and answered by our panel. So the title of our conference is Adapting with Purpose, Farming in a Changing World. We have three great speakers with us tonight. We have Helen Browning, OBE, who is the Chief Executive at the Soil Association and an aspiring organic farmer. We have John Gregson, UK General Manager at Regenified, and a passionate advocate for regenerative agriculture. And we have Richard Means, who's the Managing Partner at Ceres, a Norfolk farmer advising on farm productivity. And as in the past, the discussion is going to be expertly led by Charlotte Smith, broadcaster and presenter of BBC's Radio 4's Farming Today. We could not put this event on without our sponsors, which include our media partner, South East Farmer, Complete Land Management, Lloyds Bank, the NFU and the NFU Mutual, Solicitors Mayo Wynne Baxter, and accountants Richard Place Dobson. So may I thank you all for your sponsorship, without which this evening could not go ahead. Finally, before I hand over to Charlotte, I am delighted to say that our patron, Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Edinburgh, has recorded a welcome message for us, and we are also delighted that her private secretary is here in the room with us tonight. So thank you, enjoy. Please ask questions of our panel at the end of the discussion, and I'm going to hand you over to the Duchess of Edinburgh.
As patron of the South of England Agricultural Society, I'd like to warmly welcome you to this year's farming conference on the subject of change. This important industry has always had to be both resilient and innovative, but the current pace of change feels unprecedented. Tonight, you will hear the views of leading industry experts on how farming can not just survive, but thrive, whether through fresh thinking, new technologies, or alternative approaches. As well as creating a space for reflection, debate, and shared learning, I'm grateful to the Society for also providing an opportunity for you to come together in person or online as one community to find ways of creating a positive collective future. I hope you find this evening informative and energising.
I've not had to follow a duchess before. You are a duchess. If only. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. As you will see, I have dusted off the clipboard of self-importance, and so, Duchess notwithstanding, I'm in charge. Although anyone who knows anything about this conference will know that actually Wiz is in charge. Now, we have a very apt title for today's discussions, Adapting with Purpose, Farming in a Changing World. The challenges, I think, both short and longer term, are pretty obvious. Taxes, climate, labour, consumer tastes. But I suspect, as our panel will demonstrate, the adaptations are a little bit harder to nail down. Each of our panellists is going to speak, then we'll have a little bit of a discussion here, and then we will open it over to you. And we really, really do want to hear from you. We really, really don't want you to make a speech. In the nicest way. What we would like is questions which are polite, to the point, and short. Because that way we'll be able to hear from as many people as possible, have a really good discussion, and get to the bar before it closes, which has to be a perfect night. If you are asking a question, if you're here in the room, it couldn't be easier. You simply wave your hand in the air. When a microphone comes to you, and please do wait for the microphone, because otherwise here in the hall we won't quite hear you and the people watching online won't have a clue what's going on. Once you have the microphone, if you could stand up and tell us who you are, and if you're representing an organisation, then tell us about them too. If you are watching at home online, then just type your question into the Q&A box and it'll be ferried over to me here and we can read it out. Right, shall we get on with it? Let's hear from our first speaker this evening, Helen Browning. She's an organic farmer, a tenant farmer in Wiltshire. She also runs the local pub, and in her spare time is Chief Executive of the Soil Association.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, great to be here. Really, really fun to see so many people in the room. Yeah, I guess for me, it's always felt like a changing world. I think where any moment you live in, you think, my God, we're living in this moment of change. But, you know, hasn't it always felt that way? And I think farmers are constantly adapting to that. I certainly, when I started my farming career, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about my practical life as a farmer more than perhaps about the Soil Association, though we might kind of weave some of that in a bit later on. I guess in the 80s when I started to farm, I was very lucky to be given the opportunity to take over the tenancy of Church Farm, where I still farm near Swindon, in my 20s. I thought, right, you know, there are some big challenges coming down the road. I was really worried about some of the environmental stuff, the way the hedges were being ripped out or had been ripped out on our farm, some of the wildlife disappearing, the grey partridge had gone. I was also, when I did my degree in agricultural technology, taken to these kind of state-of-the-art pig and poultry units and thought, if this is the future, I want no part of it. So there was a big animal welfare thing for me. I could see, you know, the Milk Marketing Board was just being broken up. I felt most of our products, I had no idea where they were ending up. And I didn't believe that we would continue to get support through the CAP for much longer, how naive I was, and that we needed as farmers to secure our own future by connecting with consumers more directly, actually taking control of our businesses and the marketing of our products and adding value to those. So that was what I was all about. And I was also really interested in learning. You know, when I came back to the farm in my 20s, I was just being sold to all the time. There were just reams of salespeople queuing up at the door to try and sell me the latest pesticide or the latest fertilizer and how much yield increase it was going to get me and all the rest of it. And I just thought, oh, go away. I think I want to see what I can do without using all these inputs. So my, you know, there are many, many roads to Rome, many roads to adaptation. But the road I chose back in the mid-80s was the organic one. And I didn't go into that thinking, this is the way, the true light. I went into it thinking, this is something really interesting to explore, to see what I can produce using the resources I have on my farm primarily, rather than all the things that people are trying to sell to me. But it, you know, over the first few years of that experimenting, I became pretty committed to the system, and it's kind of been really helpful. This title of this conference, Adapting with Purpose, for me, I found my purpose, my North Star, the thing that I could kind of lock into and say, right, I'm going to try and make this thing work in a whole variety of ways. Now, I mean, the story of what happened over the past 40 years, and it has been 40 years now, is subject of probably 10 books. I've only written one of them so far. But we built up a really multi-enterprise farm on about 1,300 acres with, at peak, about 250 outdoor organic pigs. We had poultry. We had 2 dairy herds of about 110 cows apiece, shut one of them down, amalgamated with another one. We had some beef and sheep and about 400 or 500 acres of arable. So a very multifaceted mixed farming organic system. And we very much tried to add value, particularly to the pigs, because if you produce pigs organically and you don't have a market for them, you're in the poo, literally. So we started making bacon and ham and all that kind of thing. Open shops, closed shops, started online retail, did so many different things to try and get that connection with the consumer and make the whole business work. So I can't tell you about all of those stories, what went right, what went wrong, because we haven't got nearly enough time. I've got about 3 minutes left, I expect. But I have to say, it's been the most tremendous fun. And I always feel when one's thinking about the route forward from here, and I know we all feel a bit beleaguered for all sorts of reasons, but for me, there's no doubt that if you are still enjoying your farming, if you're farming in a way that you feel is meaningful for you and achieving what you want to achieve, is bringing hopefully that next generation in, then as I say, for me, it's been just great fun, if a bit chaotic at times. And I guess 40 years on, what's changed? What are the lessons from all of that, chaos that I've created over the last few decades? I guess, many of the same challenges still prevail. I think there's still an opportunity for us to cooperate more, to join up through the supply chain better, to market better, to do better environmentally. And I guess one of the wonderful things is that so many farmers now are starting to talk about becoming regenerative and starting to understand that nature can be their friend, actually, in helping to reduce their costs of production, rather than being something that you just do on the side. I'd always been interested in the human health angle, and that's really strong now. I think so much stronger, such a big opportunity for agriculture to show how what we do on the farm ultimately will relate to the big challenge for society, which is human health and the dietary cost of the cost of the NHS of dietary problems. And of course, climate change. It was only just a glimmer back in the mid-80s, but now it's writ large everywhere. And agriculture will have to be part of the solution. At the moment, it's still seen largely as part of the problem, but we have an opportunity to be part of that solution there, as well as on biodiversity and other things. So for me, when we're talking about a resilient future for farming, for me, I'm focusing on soils as ever, on trees increasingly, on water, because that's going to be a very precious commodity indeed, as well as how nature, how the birds and the bees can aid my farming system. And in terms of business strategy, I guess, I'm now in the middle of another huge change. I ran my farming business in this kind of way with all these enterprises, took on the village pub, as Charlotte mentioned, a hotel there as well now, lots of products and markets and lots of farm enterprises. Now, my daughter and her husband are now largely in charge of the farming business, and they have a completely different a business strategy. And their approach is much more about, why don't we do one thing well, rather than lots of things maybe, hopefully reasonably well, but not well enough. And their model is a much more straightforward farming model. They've gone, they love cows, so we are now milking a lot of cows on a once-a-day system. Very much grass-based, virtually no feed. I was really skeptical about the system, but I'm really starting to see it work. So they have developed an equally valid farming model that works for them, and still committed to most of the things that I like, but very much doing it in a very different way. I don't have nearly so many pigs now. And I think it's been interesting in terms of working through that whole succession process with Sophie and Di, to think about, because that's kind of a tricky time. I don't know whether we're going to get into some of this tonight, but actually that next generation thing is so important. I'm seeing far too many bright and brilliant youngsters leaving the farm, seeing their parents working their socks off all their life to not much avail. And in trying to find the way through that, where I was still feeling I want to be quite actively involved still, but it's got to be their turn. We really did go back to basics and think about our purpose again, just coming back to that purpose thing as a family. What were our values and what was going to decide the business strategy that we chose? And we came back to soils, to animal welfare, and to fun as our three sort of things that we wanted to achieve together through our farming business. And so we're doing lots and lots of work that I would love to have done 30 or 40 years ago on composting better, using compost extracts, actually moving into a much more no-till arable systems, that kind of thing. And my daughter's also a vet, so the animal welfare thing is really well covered, and I'm just thrilled the way the animals have responded to this system. And I'm focusing on the other thing that I think is so important here, which is trees. And I think farmers often see trees as a bit of the enemy, but for me they are going to be an increasingly important part of our resilience strategy. So I've got very into agroforestry over the last 10 years, since I've had a little bit of land that I actually own now, where I can do these things, because landlords don't normally like you planting trees all over their fields, and are getting very into particularly fruits, things like sea buckthorn, and also looking at how one does timber in agroforestry systems. And thinking about diversifying, that gives us a whole route to new product development, which is something we're right in the middle of too. So, different times, different approaches, lots of roads to roam. I think for me, just coming back to the theme of the event, purpose really helps us as individuals lock into an approach that we think is going to give us satisfaction in our farming careers, even if it's not going to make us rich. So I don't think there are any kind of cookie-cutter answers to that, the title of the conference today. But I hope these opening remarks at least resonate a little bit with somebody and help us get into some debate in a moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. I have a list of questions which is growing. Next, we're going to hear from John Gregson. John grew up on a farm and then spent 25 years at Waitrose. He covered pretty much everything: farming, PR, sustainability. For the past year, though, he has been the general manager for the UK for Regenified. John.
So I've got my phone with me because only to time myself, because once I wrote a speech on my phone and gave it at the conference, and my mother phoned me halfway through the speech, so I don't do that anymore. My mum died a few years ago. She phones me tonight. I'm taking that call. Okay, I just want to absolutely make that clear. So you bear with me 1 second. I also had slides which you'll be glad to know I'm not going to use. So I grew up on a farm in Lancashire. It was a small tenant farm. My father wanted to do lots of other things apart from farm, and his advice to me as a kid was, do what I didn't manage to do, escape from farming, do something secure and sensible like acting or something like that. Someone's got a really steady, solid income. So he kind of really inspired me, and I spent time as a journalist. I was at Waitrose for 25 years on the ag side of things and doing PR and all kinds of things, and that was a real learning for me. So I've seen things on both sides of the farm gate, literally, and it's really from this vantage point I want to talk about what is becoming widely known as regen agriculture. You can also call it farming with nature. You can call all kinds of other things, but it's just farming in a different way that sort of, really puts nature at the centre of everything. And I think it's not a niche or a fad. I think it's got real potential to change farming for the better. regeneration, farm with nature, whatever you call it, it isn't just about soil, it's about trust, fairness, it's about the future of food. It's about how we reconnect consumers with farming and how we connect farming and farmers to consumers as well, because I think kind of that's a two-way street. And I think kind of the signals from retailers, I wish I hadn't brought this thing now, it's really annoying.
Do you want to give it to me?
Let me pass you that. Thank you, Helen. See, cooperation in action, so it's great. I think kind of the signals from retailers and consumers are now impossible to ignore. Shoppers want food that does right by people, right by animals, right by the planet, and retailers are under growing pressure to demonstrate real progress, not just promises. And that's driving demand for verification and proof on farm. So helping people prove what they're doing, particularly in something that doesn't have a sort of solid kind of definition in law like regen. Now, if that makes sense. And I think maintaining trust and maintaining trust in marketing and the sort of selling of food is really important, because one of the things I've seen in my years of food retail is that it doesn't take much to destroy consumer trust. You know, if you look at Horsegate, I cut a lot of PR teeth during Horsegate. That was absolutely awful. We've had all kinds of things from that through to kind of the organic egg scandal, through to through to a weird thing about kind of broccoli and a woman who is in tantric sex. It's just bizarre. I've covered all kinds of weird things to do with food and farming, and it's always weird things that will change the landscape and really start to erode trust. And the one thing you need with your consumers and your customers is absolute trust in everything you're doing. I think there's this idea, I think, that sort of supermarkets are like this kind of mega brain in a glass jar that are just intent on taking over the world and destroying everything farmers hold dear. And I'm not sure that's actually true, but it's sort of, supermarkets and retailers are collections of people of many different views, many of whom are as worried about farming and agriculture as we are in this room. And my former boss at Waitrose for the last few years there was this amazing guy called James Bailey. And James had, so he come from Sainsbury's. You can't hold things against people. You've got to let these things go sometimes. But he contributed a chapter in a book. The book's called Extension or Regeneration: Food as the Problem, Food as the Solution. And if you can find a copy, it's well worth a read. Now, he argued that the food system we have today, as Helen said, it contributes to climate change, biodiversity loss and poor health. Yet food itself could be the foundation of the solution if we rethink how it's produced and valued. James called for three things: disruption, new thinking and new business models. And that's right across the sector, from Farmgate right the way up to retail and along. Collaboration, excuse me. Government, business and civil society has got to work together. And customer empowerment, you've got to make sure that people always have honest information about how their food is grown and produced and what's involved in that. His point is simple. His point was simple. If food doesn't evolve, we're in trouble. He also challenges retailers to move from being extractors of value to stewards of value, to see regeneration not as philanthropy but as good business. And I think a couple of weeks ago, just like I said, if you can find that book, it's well worth reading. There was a report a couple of weeks ago called The New Roadmap for sort of farm resilience and food resilience from UKRI and the AFN network. And that was authored by, co-authored by an amazing guy called Tim Benton. And Tim paints pretty much the same picture as James Bailey from a completely different end, end of the spectrum, not from food retail, but from a solid base in academia. And Tim again describes the UK food system as fragile and reactive, forever lurching from crisis to crisis: droughts, floods, energy shocks, trade disruption. He proposed three big transformations in that paper: farming with nature, a theme you're hearing here this evening, putting soil, water and biodiversity at the heart of all on-farm and food system profits. That's got to be the core of all that. Smarter land use, integrate food, energy and nature, don't force them to compete. And healthier diets made easier, align retail, procurement and education with this idea of greater public health. The message is clear. We spent decades optimizing for efficiency, and now we've got a design for proper resilience across the whole supply chain, not just on farm. And if we needed proof, we saw that during the pandemic. I sat in on daily calls every day, 8:15 in the morning with DEFRA, all during the pandemic. And those calls are retailers and planners and DEFRA and the government working together, trying to find where the food was, who could move it, and who had labour. That was absolutely terrifying. What it showed to me was the thin veneer that we all exist under. We all think that things, are just going to keep working. It doesn't take much to change that. That was a real stress test, and we barely passed it. And I'm not actually sure we do a whole lot better now. I think kind of regen agriculture, a farm with nature, is a real way to improve things for everybody. The farmers I've worked with, are really enthusiastic about the way it gives them back control over their farms. One of them said, we've always farmed with a focus on nature and conservation. It was a natural progression to move to regen. It reconnected me to my land. I'm a better farmer for it. The farm, the livestock, the team and nature are thriving. And by the way, let's be clear, this can be an organic system too. This is not just regen. These are people who are farming with nature, who are really trying to figure out how to do things in a different way with much less impact. And I think a crucial part of their success, and this may be a controversial thing to say in this room, so I'm very much expecting questions here, is the change of focus from yield to margin. That seems to be a common thread in all the farmers I've spoken to. They're all thinking about margin. Where are they making money on their farm, not how much they actually producing. That's where they're making money and how can they make their businesses better. And I think that's absolutely key. And I think, and the other thing that always gets thrown at us is, you can't feed the world with regen ag or organic ag. And Helen and I have had this thrown at us for years and years and years. But we already produce more than enough food in the world. A third of it's wasted. It never gets to people's plates. The real problem isn't production, it's waste, it's inequity, and it's how we value food. And regen farming, farm with nature, strengthens food security, it keeps soils fertile, it reduces all the dependency on inputs, and it helps create shorter, more resilient supply chains that waste less. We don't need to produce more, we need to waste less and instead value more the food we have. And cost is another common thing. People say, oh yeah, food will cost more. But if you look at, if we're honest about it, if we keep degrading soil, if we keep overusing inputs and squandering energy and fertilizer, food prices are going to rise anyway. What costs will we face if we don't act? So I've got about 30 seconds, so I'm going to leap around here in my note, and I'm going to go straight to the close here and just say very quickly, both James Bailey and Tim Benton, from very different starting points, are saying the same thing. The food system has to evolve. Regen, farming with nature, is one of the most practical and hopeful routes forward. It's not about going backwards, but about farming in ways that make business and environmental sense. We've optimized for yield, now we must optimize for margin and resilience. We've produced abundance, now we've got to stop wasting it. We must design a system where good food is affordable because it's efficient in its truest sense, efficient with nature, energy, and trust. And we can rebuild that trust. We can rebuild that trust not in just how food is grown, but in the entire supply chain. It offers, and Farm with Nature offers a future where small farms can thrive, retailers can offer genuinely sustainable food, and customers can buy it with confidence. If food has been part of the problem, it's also part of the solution. That's it. Thank you. Sorry.
Right, let's hear from Richard. Richard is a farmer as well in Norfolk. He's mainly, though, the managing partner at Ceres Rural, an independent rural consultancy, and he specialises in farm management and strategic farm advice.
Thank you very much. I will be slightly different in that I do have slides. So as a good farming consultant, I've got a few slides to share with you. Hopefully to promote a bit of debate and discussion and, bit of background into what I want to talk about. And also I'm very pleased, having to go third, that I've heard a few parts of my sort of pitch for the next 10 minutes line up quite nicely as well. So phew, lucky that one. Good evening, everyone. Great to be here tonight. And as part of the introduction as well, obviously, yes, I am managing partner, but I'm joint managing partner at Ceres. My slightly more famous co-managing partner is a certain cheerful Charlie from Clarkson's Farm. So unfortunately, you've got the less famous of the two here tonight. My farming in Norfolk is on the edge of the fens. So trees, Helen, are... We do have some. And actually, nice thing, my grandfather laid out some woods on the farm. My father added to them, I've added to them, and none of our neighbours have done any of that. So it's quite a nice difference. But one thing we don't have any hedges. It's all ditches. So very different landscape to what you've been used to. And before I do start, the balance between can you grow enough food in your, the regen organic systems versus everything else? Well, there's one thing that's helping balance that equation, and Manjaro is having quite a big effect. And I don't think, it's not in my talk, but I don't think we realise how much of an impact on food that we produce. In particular, I'm seeing this at the moment with potatoes. So my farming cropping at home is wheat, potatoes, sugar beet, oilseed rape, barley and beans. But spuds at the moment, yeah, we're struggling. It's not a good year this year. Right, let me crack on. I just want to plug the business quickly, Ceres Group, and very briefly. As you can see on the slide here, when we started back in 2021, so we're just over 4 years old, myself, 7 others set up the business. And this was really in recognition of sort of the demand for high quality independent advice. And we were confident that there was a place, hopefully, in the industry for us to do that as a new option, being slightly a disruptor, but also where we could make a positive difference. And as you can see, we've grown the business, got many different parts to it, including 12 months ago, we set up a research entity, which is a totally sort of standalone entity that we wanted to do is right from the word go when we finally did it last year. We've grown from 20 people to over 100 in the 4 years we've been doing it. 3 offices, started with Saffron Walden, Norwich and Oxford, up to 8, the most recent one being Newbury, and hopefully in the not too distant future there might be one slightly closer to here. So we wanted to be sustainable in what we did, and as Helen said, we actually want to have fun whilst working with our clients. So that was one of the main objectives of the business. So where are we at the moment? Well, the title of the conference is very apt, isn't it? Adapting with Purpose. Government support for the first time ever definitely in my career, is no longer. We have no direct subsidies or support. So the business of farming, whether that's crops, livestock or anything else, actually it needs to be profitable on its own 2 feet. And that is the first time ever in my career that we have to do that. Otherwise, we will not be making a profit in our businesses. And that safety net of the cheque arriving each December was, in hindsight, so easy, but no longer there. But of course, there are some parts of the business that have operated without it. So they're ahead of the curve. The environment and the environmental policy is dictating a lot of what's coming through, especially through government at the moment, but perhaps slightly less further than after Trump's tariffs and a bit of a dismissal over the Atlantic of the environmental concerns. And in the not too distant future, January 2027, we've got the carbon border tax coming in, which will have an impact into the UK. Yes, the economic positioning at the moment, I think we're all aware, we're in an up horn, down corn moment at the moment. And the big difference, I think, is the amplified volatility that we are seeing. The good times are definitely higher. Harvest 2022 for us with very, very high prices, but I think we'll see some very low lows as well. So when the times are good, we need to make everything right so we have a solid base and platform to be able to survive when they become tougher. And lastly, IHT changes. Yes, we've heard a lot about it. I won't dwell on it because we've read and seen so much on it within the last 12 months or so, and it will create reform in the industry. That is without doubt. A little part of this is definitely positive, such as earlier and better succession planning on our farms and businesses. But unfortunately, there are going to be times and situations where a death at the wrong time could be, very catastrophic. But either way, this will cost the industry more at a time probably when we can least afford it. So, moving on, and this is quite a nice link to what the previous speakers have been saying. The theme is obviously adapting with purpose, and to get to the point, when I started my career in farming and farm consultancy, I was always told that yield is king. I can remember those days from university, and which seemed a pretty reasonable place to start at the time. However, I think there is a much more apt phrase to be using in our industry now, and that is maximum sustainable output. In an arable world, this means using hybrid farming techniques to get the best margins with the most appropriate actions. And rather than having polarized or entrenched views that we can only farm, regen or organic, or we can only farm intensively, there is clearly a benefit with a hybrid approach. And this is something that I like to practice and try at home on my own farm as well. And something I've come across in many situations with my own clients and through our business. And I see some excellent organic farmers, excellent regen farmers, but equally I see ones that have tried and failed as well. And it's about knowing what is right for the right person. Don't underestimate the level of management input that is needed to achieve some of the different systems. Quite often and unsurprisingly, soil type is quite a big player in all of this, and obviously the management skill that's at hand really will dictate which is the most appropriate approach. At home, I'm constantly trialling, as I've said. I think I probably I blame Duncan for introducing me to trials when working with him on the Kellogg's Origins project, and I think that probably got me kick-started, Duncan, and I've since done many, many more after that. But what is quite clear is that every farm is different. Every farm has a different setup. So every farm is going to have its own unique solution, and it's about finding that will make the difference. So why do we need to do this? Well, this is quite a stark graph. I've taken it from the AHDB figures from 2020 to 2024, and what it shows in the green bars is the top 25% of producers and the net margin they're achieving for each of those crops. The blue is the middle 50%, and the orange is the bottom 25%. And that's for the 5 years, 2020 to 2024. Should AHDB run the numbers again for 2025, I suspect that might only be that the top 15 or 20% are making a profit. So that is profit without subsidy. So theoretically, this is now, well, it's not theoretical, this is now the reality. And what we shouldn't do, we shouldn't let stewardship, SFI, diversifications mask the fact that there could be an underperformance in growing crops and farming. And whilst I don't have them to hand, I'm sure there will be a similar graph for livestock, fruit and everything else. So it does raise a further question that if only 25% of farms make a profit, is the pot big enough to share in a contract farming scenario or a tenancy? One to debate further, I'm sure, tonight. And we've seen recently the announcement that came from Velcourt, who have served notice on 20% of their contract farmed area, or about 10,000 hectares. So they were applying, obviously, the 80-20 rule and looked at it. And unfortunately, they couldn't make it stack up. So they are going through a period of change as well, one of the biggest farmers in the country. Moving on from here, and why have we got in this position? Well, farming in hindsight is lovely. We would love to be able to do this. And actually, when we had that cheque of £220 per hectare arriving in our bank accounts every December, maybe that was the time to do all of the restructuring and reviews of our business. Sadly, we didn't, because we didn't know at the time, and it's easy to say now. But what this graph shows very quickly is total factor productivity over a 50-year period. And that is an economic concept that measures the efficiency by which all inputs, so labour, capital, technology, are combined in the production process. It's a guide to economic efficiency and a major long-term driver for growth. And what you can see, unfortunately, is how far the UK has fallen behind the likes of the Dutch. So the blue line is the Dutch, right at the top, and followed by the Germans, the French, the US, the French, and then the UK. So our growth has been about 50% of that of the Dutch. And clearly this needs reversing pretty quickly. So what can we pivot into very quickly to help? Well, one of the things that you probably all are aware of is that there's beginning to see an amount of private money coming in for environmental actions that we can do on farm. And this private money comes through a myriad of different sources. These are just a few I've selected that we've come across and we work with. But what is evident is that these options and opportunities can be found in the marketplace, but you have to work a lot harder than we used to do to get the old BPS check. So it doesn't replace subsidies, but what it does do is augment and enhance those net margins and enhance our goal of trying to achieve maximum sustainable output for our farm businesses. And this is available to all of us, no matter what system of production that we employ on our farms. And then the last one to finish up with are technologies. And this is my final point on these slides, and the need for us to all embrace new technologies. And interestingly, just before we started tonight, I was sent a paper. It was a paper by Dieter Helm in October about farming profitability, and I had a quick read through that. And he was saying in this paper that the transition to digital and the digital revolution that will come through farming will be bigger than going from horse to tractor and for the introduction of bagged fertiliser into the UK, which takes some thinking about, doesn't it, to get your head around it. But we need to be adopting these technologies to get into that top 25% of producers or to catch up ground on the Dutch. And, you know, the level or the types of technology that are out there and that will be coming, clearly gene editing, when it's becoming, it will be widely available in due course. AI, the use of AI and the digitization of everything and collating data to improve our understanding on farms. The data is out there. It's about how we grab it, how we use it with purpose, and then allowing us to use that with other tech, whether it's drones or anything like that, for more informed decision making. We simply can't ignore this if we are going to keep sort of persevering and getting up into that top 25% and catching up with the Dutch. And one of the things that the Dutch have done exceptionally well, and Wageningen University, who they work very closely with as an industry, I think is a lesson to all of us, and we need to be working a lot closer with our research institutions, and hence that is one of the main reasons that why we set up Series Research, to help ourselves but help our clients and benefit from that knowledge exchange from research to on the farm in the most practical way. So to sum up and to conclude, well, we know the challenges are clear, aren't they? We're in for a big amount of change. We need to be assessing all opportunities on farms. You won't be surprised for a farm consultant to be saying that, but be open to new technologies, and very importantly, for the purpose, from my point of view, is have your eye on the prize, which is maximum sustainable output. And if we can achieve that, and it will be different on every farm, then we're going in the right direction. So thank you very much.
Well, if you're anything like me, ladies and gentlemen, you now have a piece of paper with some doodles and a lot of questions. So I'm going to kick this off just briefly and then come to you. So start formulating your short, to the point, polite inquiries. Right. Adapting with purpose. So the first thing I'm sort of realising is you have to decide what your purpose is, be it fun, maximum sustainable output, or nature at the heart. Is it that you have to define what you're aiming at before you can start working out how you adapt? Helen?
Well, I think it helps quite a lot. I think if you've got a bit of a North Star and what you're, and I interpreted the purpose in the title as that kind of North Star, that thing that gets me up out of bed in the morning, the thing that I feel I can, that allows me to guide my decisions. And I don't know that purpose always gets you, does it always make you the most money? Almost certainly not. But actually, in a world where sometimes it's quite difficult to know what's going to be the best business strategy, doing what you feel is the right thing to do, and that's the way I've kind of approached some of this stuff, maybe helps. And I think it certainly helps in terms of, I mentioned it in terms of succession, and that getting us all onto the same page, as whether it's a team of, within a business or as a family or whatever, that kind of understanding of how are we going to make decisions when there are different roads to Rome, how are we going to choose the road that's right for us. And I think that actually defining your purpose helps with that enormously, because there's lots of different ways to go about farming and food production and all the rest of it, but you'll be successful at the ones where you really feel motivated, aligned, you're getting real job satisfaction out of it. So finding that for you or your family or your business feels like a really important first step.
John?
Yeah, I think that, and I think sort of, it's sort of, and it's really important to have a plan. And I think, I was always amazed at Waitrose, the number of farmers we would talk to at shows who didn't have a business plan. They knew whether the farm made or lost money, but they didn't know which bits made or lost money. I think that's really important, and that can form a part of that kind of purpose ultimately. And I think, but the purpose can come later. If you look at my boss, Gabe Brown's journey, he started down the regen route out of need because he had 4 years of failed harvest and no incomes. But out of that, he realised something, and then his purpose came along. Then, so I think it doesn't have to start with that. Lots of people have sort of found that later on. And then another guy we kind of work with up in Lancashire, Martin Corns, who's a great guy. Some people may have seen him at Groundswell. His reason was because he couldn't stand salesmen and wanted to stop them coming up the drive. So he just kind of adopted that, and he's very happy in this hermit existence, kind of making money off 150 acres. He thinks it's great. So it's a curate's egg, isn't it, really, I suppose?
Richard?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think I'd go back to post when I left university. I was fortunate enough to go to Newcastle to be an agric with one or two members of the audience as well. And when we left, we set up a group where we're all over the country, and one in Northern Ireland as well. And every year we got together on each farm and reviewed, very open book and transparent, what was going on and what our aims and objectives were. And this was we were quite young when we did that. And I found that really, really helpful. All of them are pretty successful in what they've been doing since. But that was probably the purpose that we came up with, and we set each other sort of goals of what we wanted to achieve and hopefully achieve them. But when it comes to changing or what you want to do on farm, I think you've got to have the passion for your choice. And I have seen a friend and a client up in Norfolk who went from a very successful conventional farming business to a very regenerative farming business. And I can remember him saying to me, he said, with the setup and the staff we had at the time, he said, I didn't even have a job because the guys were more than capable of running it, but they didn't excite me. And he absolutely threw himself into it, head and shoulders into it, and has made a really big difference. And that was a great example of where it's worked well. So having that passion behind it, you can't underestimate it. So that, and also the most successful businesses we deal with, it's pretty obvious to say, but their ability to work with their teams on farm is second to none. I mean, absolutely top drawer. And they churn out top yields or top performances every year. And it's massive team effort.
What's the role of the size of the farm in that and in the ability to have lots of different enterprises? Is this something which people who've got 1,300 acres can do, but a small farm is really going to struggle, if you're honest? I'll start with you.
But there's lots of different ways of cracking that one. I mean, the numbers of joint ventures that we now work with, if you're smaller and you don't think you've quite got the scale, there'll be others that have got a similar mindset, and you can team up together and do much better together than you can trying to do it individually. So there's always a different approach to it, or you put a lot more into into the farming, not in an intensive way, but going from an organic point of view is going to take a lot more managing. And I know John Pawsey does a lot of very good, quite big scale organic farming in my neck of the woods, and does it exceptionally well. So there are various ways of doing it, but yes, you can make it work depending on your size.
A bit depends on the enterprise too. I think, if you're trying to do a dairy business on a small holding, it's probably quite hard these days unless you're really adding a lot of value to what you're producing. But actually, small scale, I've seen some really successful small acreages work well if they're really sort of eco-intensive. If they, they might have a great poultry unit and some trees, and horticulture, fruit production, poultry work are quite high value on small scale amounts of land. You can stack a lot of enterprises on a bit of land. I think it's more about the management intensity that you deploy. When there's a lot of acres, you tend to want more straightforward enterprises like arable or dairy to manage those acres. Horticulture and agroforestry, that kind of thing. You can do an awful lot of food production on not many acres at all. And if you get it right, there's a real income to be made from it. John?
Yeah, I'll just go back to Martin. I can see kind of Tom's down here. He's not in a huge acreage either, it's sort of local guy down here. So we work with people from sort of 10 acres up to many thousands of acres. The biggest farm we work with, okay, it is in this country, it's abroad, is sort of 250,000 acres, which is kind of, which is a scale that's just beyond measure. But Martin, I'm going to go back to Martin now. What he does is he's got many different stacked enterprises, and Helen's right, he's got to be engaged in everything he does, but to him that's what makes farming really exciting, and he absolutely loves it, and he's experimenting all the time, and I think that's what's brought his passion back. So I personally think depending on your attitude you can make it work right across.
Right, I want to come to the audience. If you can start putting your hands up so we can start getting microphones to you. And if you're online, get typing. While we do that, I'm just going to ask very quickly, what's the role of the supply chain in this, Helen?
So what's the role of the supply chain?
What should it be? What will it be?
I think the one could go at that in a number of different ways. Our approach has been try and take as much control of the supply chain as you possibly can, rather than letting it do things to you. I think that the attitude of the supply chain is changing very quickly because they've gone from a position where actually it's been able to pick and choose. I think most processors and a lot of retailers are starting to wonder where their food's going to come from in the future, and are wanting to have more secure long-term relationships with farmers, and I think that's a really good thing. The other side of the equation is that as farmers, we've got to also be prepared to lock into long-term relationships. We can't have it both ways. You can't say, we're really pissed off because this process is pissing us around if we're also pissing the processor around. So actually trying to build cooperation through the supply chain, I think is really important. I think there's more opportunity for that now than there was. I think one of the challenges at the moment is infrastructure, in terms of actually being able to do more yourself in terms of accessing markets. It's a real challenge when all the abattoirs are closing and you haven't got any small scale processors to be able to access those markets and take it through, as I've tried to do under your own steam. But yeah, it's I think I'm hoping that the supply and the retail side, the supply chain and the retail side, will start to really support. And one of the things we've done at the Soil Association is do things like exchange market to give a vehicle for them to support farmers who are making the changes that they say they want to see.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think sort of, you know, we will see a change in attitude to farmers, and hopefully the bad old days of supermarket power will fall behind us. But having said that, supermarkets, you know, and retailers are still really important, because that pull is absolutely critical. We can sit here and try and push kind of regen and change the way that sort of farming is done, but you need that pull from the other end of the supply chain as well. And the other thing I think we kind of need to acknowledge, and this can sometimes be an unpopular opinion, is that farming is going to continue being a global business, because the idea that people are not going to demand a wide choice of things year round is a genie that's kind of going to be hard to put back in the box. And I think so on a global basis, farming kind of has to change. But the first page of any supermarket ag strategy is always about the kind of, you know, we've got to guarantee the security of the supply that puts the food in our shops. That's absolutely critical, and I think that plays into that.
When you go beyond the farm position and you get where we start with supplies of all the variable costs or the inputs, but also the labour and the machinery side of things, that's been a big squeeze, one that hopefully technology might solve. But on the other end, and I think, like I was trying to highlight on the slide about the sort of some of the private environmental options and things that you can do to add value as well, comes down to working with the end users there. I know I've had an email today about someone wants to come in and do some deep core carbon testing on the farm at home, and that will be to do with my spring malting barley, which has got another £40 a hectare for doing various things and like that. So that is where we're working together with them, and if it benefits production and the soils and everything else along the way, that's a win-win for everyone.
Great. Let's get a question from the audience. Where are we starting? Just here.
Thank you. Lisa Scott, Dorking and Hawley Green Party. And first of all, thank you everyone for dedicating your life to producing the food that our nation survives on. We can probably give up with the current government, but what would you like to see the next government do to support farmers to diversify and do things like yourselves, to have a safety net so that if things do go pear-shaped, we've heard that going into regenerative farming can be costly and not work. What sort of safety net would you like that to happen so that going pear-shaped isn't a disaster?
Right, so what would you like from a government? Where shall I start? John, let's start with you.
Oh, bloody hell. Let's go. I think this is like such a cop-out answer, by the way. So I need to flag this now. But I think we need acknowledgement from politicians of all stripes that farming is a key strategic industry, and I think that's really, really important, and I don't think that's acknowledged enough now. So that's what, and I think from that you can attach whatever branches of support you want. Richard.
Okay, I think I've got 3 points I want to quickly touch on. In terms of support, I mean, I was always told and looked into what happened in New Zealand when they lost their support mechanism. There was quite a lot of change, significant change in the industry back then, with farms going out, support for other farms, very much more corporate introduction into the industry there as well. But they have, moved on from having support. And one thing that does happen in New Zealand, they have a much more preferential position on capital gains tax, so they can be entrepreneurial and grow and not get penalised at the other end. And also, they do, from an IHT point of view, have a very generous position compared to where we now are. So, I mean, if you're not going to support us on that end, if we are entrepreneurial and push our businesses forward, maybe at the other end have a bit more beneficial positioning. As a safety net, obviously the US model is more insurance and underpinning minimum levels of income. And you think we're in tricky times at the moment in UK and Europe. I mean, the US farmers, they've had some massive harvests, but with the prices where they are, a lot of them are at 20% below cost of production where the markets are at the moment. So there'll be some interesting times over there. And in terms of the other thing in the UK, I did touch on it. We've got the carbon border adjustment mechanism and the carbon tax coming through in 2027. I've quickly worked it out. I think on, say, a 9 tonnes per hectare milling wheat crop, that's possibly going to add £5 a tonne onto your cost of production. Is the 50 or 60,000 tonne vessel of wheat coming into Tilbury or wherever going to have the same applied to it because that was produced with fertiliser outside of the UK? I suspect not. So, I mean, that level playing field, we keep talking about it. I think the recognition of farms in the UK deliver and grow produce fantastically well with actually very high environmental levels, which we should be very proud of. I'd just like to see that reflected by the UK government and support us, and we can carry on that basis.
Helen?
Yeah, I think in a way we need an economic framework around farming which actually does what we call internalised, account for the environmental and other pluses and minuses. And I think farmers, we do need longer term policies and thinking. It's very hard to go from today to tomorrow not knowing what that support for environmental goods is going to look like. So I think the public money for public goods, getting the SFI on track and understanding what that's going to look like. But also I think government's got a real opportunity to regularise the private markets because that does still feel like a real wild west out there. There is lots of money wanting to get into helping to support this transition to more regenerative farming, but it needs a framework to do that. But the big opportunity for government, which would benefit farming enormously if they could get it right, and the really big win for them, the thing we need to sell into them, is that farming is right at the heart of the mission about sorting out the public health challenge, the NHS. That's where we should be really putting a lot of our effort. We've got to shift to prevention, and food, good healthy food from our farms is all about prevention. We've got to get that link through from DEFRA thinking to the sort of public health NHS thinking. And things like public procurement are a really good place to start, because if we can start to pump prime those markets through things like schools and hospitals, making sure we've got local food and better quality food going into those places, more horticulture, more fruit, most of it's imported at the moment. I think there's a real opportunity for that. And that's where the money is. If we're looking for the money to support good farming long term, it's in the health agenda, but we've got to get governments to join up health with food, with farming.
Okay, let's get another question. Where are we going? Thank you.
Isaac van Heerden for AHDB, and thank you for referencing our figures there. Recently, I was lucky enough to be in Rome at the World Food Forum with one of the jobs that I do outside of AHDB, and I was at the launch of the Total Factor Productivity, the latest report, with some very clever people in the room. Interestingly, so their whole report is around some better soil health, and one of the 4 strategies that they say to accelerate total farm productivity growth is around scaling of adoption of proven tools. So to the panel, what do you think is the proven tools for better soil health, and how do we scale that across the industry?
Richard.
I knew you'd do that. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, the metric of carbon as a measurement of our soil health, or worm counts. I have done that in the past, although I now probably get juniors to help me do that. The soil health is fundamental if we're growing crops and grass, and I think it's not just the carbon in it. I mean, it's the friability. It's the ability of that soil to deliver to the crop and the grass when it needs it the most. And I hate to say this, but my father was actually quite forward-thinking. He had our 4 sites on our farm back in 1991 carbon tested, bizarrely, and I 30 years later repeated said event. And what surprised me was that he was a very traditional power harrow combi type farmer. And I was thinking, oh my God, are we going to be in trouble here? And what did surprise me is that our soil carbon levels had gone up in those 30 years. And the only thing I could put that down to was the fact that the straw burning ban came through. And instead of burning it, which I really enjoyed doing as a kid, we were chopping it and incorporating virtually all of it back into the soil, apart from in front of potatoes because of fear of slugs. And I think that one action alone has proven to me that, you know, we hear a lot about it, but the organic matter, and hence the reason why it works with a mixed farming approach and everything like that, is vital. It doesn't matter what soils you're on. Yes, if you're on sands, very hard to move the dial very much on carbon and organic matter. But everywhere else, in particular on clays, that makes the biggest difference that I have ever seen and continue to see on farms all around the area that I work in.
Helen?
So I think if I was picking three things that I would say are proven on soils, one is compaction, relieving compaction. There's still an awful lot of soils that are incredibly compacted. If you don't get the physics of your soil sorted out, then nothing else, the biology is not going to work. And so, you know, we're still using a lot of very heavy kit. One of the things that excites me, we talked about the technology earlier on, the opportunity for more autonomous, lighter weight machines on our land, because I think that is one of the big challenges our soils have faced over time. The second you mentioned is organic matter, getting enough organic matter back into soils to keep that friability, to keep the microbial life functioning. A lot of soils have become very dead. Earthworm counts are a quite useful way of kind of, you know, if you've got something like 16 earthworms per spade, yield is improved by something like 30%. There's some really quite, you know, really clear metrics on yield and soil microbiology in earthworms. The third area, which I think has been really neglected, is plant diversity. There's no doubt that your soils are really driven by plant diversity. That's why these herbal lays are being a bit of a breakthrough, because we have tended to plant one plant at a time in the soil. And if you want to really drive soil structure improvements, then that plant diversity and getting that working is really important. There's lots of talk about lower no-till, min-till. That can be helpful, but I don't think it's the holy grail on its own. I would say of the three that are proven, I would go for those three now.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And I think sort of, you know, last week I was up in, not far from Birmingham, with a farmer called Tom Collier, excuse me, and Tom started farming on pretty marginal land, and he sort of adopted regen, you know, as you say, did lays and cover crops and made sure that you know, he really worked to the proper 6 principles of soil health, and Tom's soil is just now extraordinary. And so I think, you know, I would say from, you know, if you look at the 6 principles, which just to read them out here, is sort of context, minimize disturbance, armor diversity, living roots and livestock on your land. If you can, you don't have to, but livestock performing the function that sort of wild herbivores would have done in the past, so extensively grazed, all of that stuff. I think if you do that, you will see change, and I think that is my shorthand toolkit.
Okay, I'm just going to take one online. It's actually kind of 3 questions moulded together to be one, so I hope the question, Glenn Buckingham and Anonymous will forgive me. Glenn talks about resilience through diversity, not only in what we grow, but also who grows it. Does the panel see the importance of involving the local community and giving them access to land? And Anonymous is doing a permaculture thing on 24 acres with local people, again, bringing people together to grow, to eat. What's the role for that, John?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And if you look at sort of, you know, and I think America, you know, really led in the idea of the community farm and the civic farm years and years ago. They do some really interesting things. And I think if you can get people interested in farming and you can get people onto your farm, it's really, really good. There's a guy actually, when we used to do the Silver Lapwing Award years ago, and Martin will remember this, there's Martin down there. There was a guy down in Essex who had this amazing farm, and he basically had opened it up to the local school kids and the community and everything else, and the support in the community for his farm and what he was doing was just extraordinary. And I think we can slightly sometimes shy away from being open about sort of what happens on farm. And I think if you can get away from that and involve the local community somehow without it taking over your business, I think that's really, really important.
Richard?
The sticking point is always dealing with people takes quite a lot of time, effort, and involvement.
People.
And we have got, don't worry, we've got clients who the last thing they want to see is more people anywhere near the farm. So you've got quite a polarised view of people on farms, but at the reasonable scale, and yes, that's fantastic for engagement. I think things like Open Farm Sundays have been awesome for sort of engaging with the public, and the people who do that, really put a lot of effort into those ones. The local one near me is run by Michael Sly, and a huge amount of effort goes into that. And the other thing that I've come across as well roundabout is the care farms as well, which are on smaller scales, but they do bring in parts of the community who haven't necessarily experienced agriculture, and that's also quite nice to see. So whether there's more support for that type of thing, just to encourage the interest into agriculture would be great.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting at a time when actually I'm seeing a lot of farms where the kids aren't wanting to come back to the farm, and yet I'm seeing a lot of people out there in the world who would love to have a chance to start getting involved in growing, even if it's on a sort of part-time basis. It might not be their full-time job, but actually they want to have access to land and the opportunity to get to start to learn about that. And it's something at the Soil Association we've been trying to help match make some of those opportunities between bigger landowners often who they won't miss 5 acres. I understand that some farmers don't want anybody else there, but sometimes it can really start to make the whole farm feel more buzzy and more like a community. I think there's a real opportunity in all of that. We run a little land trust at the Soil Association, and we've got a farm up on the M25 at Maple Cross, Wood Oaks, where we have really opened up to new entrants. We've done a sort of pitch up thing. Some of you will know of pitch up. I think it's a brilliant initiative from what I know of it, where you're enabling farmers, new entrants, to pitch to farmers their business ideas and get involved. But at Wood Oaks, we've got a flower grower, small scale horticulture, and a lot of volunteering opportunities. We have run a compost club every Friday, all that kind of stuff. Loads of people want to have access to land to get involved with this. And as farmers, if we don't embrace that, provide those opportunities, we shouldn't be surprised if people start to walk away from wanting to support us. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in that kind of thing. Some of the brokering of the relationships, particularly when they're business relationships, need to be carefully managed. I think that's where sometimes some of those things go wrong. But, get on my farm. I'd like to hear more farmers saying that kind of thing, providing those opportunities.
And I was just going to say, we could just have one point really briefly. Look how trendy allotments are now. There's a real appetite for this. And so I think, we should be embracing it, because I think it's going to be good for farming.
And it was very remiss of me not to mention a certain Clarkson's Farm for engaging with the general public to improve the awareness in the industry. So thank you, Charlie.
A fair point, well made. Very good.
Right, if you've got a question, I know we've got the microphone here, but while he stands up, just stick your hand in the air just so I know how many more people Wiz has to run round. Okay, go for it, sir.
Good evening. My name is Matt Record. I live in Bolcombe. I'm a local citizen. I'm a trendy allotment holder, I'm afraid, but I don't work in the farming industry. I'm here really as an interested person, someone whose awareness of the farming industry has grown significantly because of Clarkson's Farm, the community that I live in, and I'm a member of the agricultural showground here. But my professional world, I work at Ernst & Young, and Ernst & Young works with businesses all around the world, and one of the major areas that we're working with clients on is around their journey of digitization and data. You talked about the value and the benefit of AI. You talked about including transparency around the supply chain. You talked about actually this transition from yield to margin. Those are all issues which require significant change in the way that data is both collected and interpreted. My question is actually, do we have the right infrastructure, the right capability in place across the farming community in order to be able to facilitate that? And where do you think you are on that journey? And where do we need to be in 3-5 years' time?
John.
Do you want me to go? So I'm really lucky and maybe not lucky in that I work with quite a lot of really young trendy tech bros who are all over this, who teach me things that I would not have known otherwise, which is great. And they've all come out of Silicon Valley and they're all really clever and everything else. I'm just an absolute potato. There's no two ways about it. But I think I'm not as gloomy about AI as the capabilities of AI as perhaps a lot of people are, in that I think it can do tremendous things about data analysis, all the on-farm advice stuff, particularly in context. You know, you can see a point in the future where with kind of machine learning, if you throw all of the challenges on your farm into an AI model at some point in the future, it will spit back out exactly what you know. And I think that's really exciting. My concern, so that's that point, but I don't think we do have enough skills in the farming sector yet. I think there's a tremendous gap there, and I think that is a huge opportunity. I'm really lucky, but you know, I think sort of there is a gap. But my concern is about, you know, AI is really useful. I use it a lot, and I find it really interesting and really good to engage with and to sense check things with and everything else. Great, as long as you know what you're talking about, which you know you have to you kind of have to interrogate it in the right way, depending on which model which is really important. But then there's a question about kind of data centers, which somebody said to me last week are the closest things to black holes we have on Earth, you know, sucking all these resources. So, you know, do we end up fixing farming and then making some other resource heavy thing that's just going to be a drain? That's not the question you asked, but I think that's something that I think about when you think about this possible future of all worlds. That was gloomy, wasn't it? Sorry.
Helen. Yeah, I mean, one of the areas we've got involved with very heavily at the Soil Association is about how do we actually pick up better data from farms on the environmental, social and animal welfare front, particularly the environmental front, through something called Soil Association Exchange, because we really recognise that there was a big dearth. There's a lot of financial data. People are picking up financial data well, but actually picking up environmental data in a really rigorous way, and then trying to make sense of it. Because I think as we start to, you know, a lot of information is going to become available. I think we'll get better methods, better technologies of picking up data. But then it's about usable insights and being able to turn that into something that we as practitioners, it helps us make better management decisions. And I think that's the big gap at the moment. I think we're really early doors with this, where we are starting to kind of recognise, yes, we need to really understand what's working well. For me, that's a really exciting thing, that we can start to track soils and, you know, biodiversity in the field and all these kind of things, and then correlate that with the practices and keep learning about, you know, how to do stuff better. But then we need to be able to turn that into good insights. And I think at the moment, as a farmer, we still need some people to help with that. And I think we learn best often from people. So I think there's a bit of both. And that's what we've been trying to do through Exchange, is to have both the data and the people to help you make sense of it, and to, depending on your own context, then think about where do those insights take me in terms of improving my business and the reward I'm going to get for making improvements in these areas.
Oh, there's so much to go on. Yeah, the amount of data that we create in the industry is just phenomenal already. So that's one thing. It's using it. I mean, computer learning is, you know, it tries something, doesn't go right, it learns, it repeats and takes a different path. You know, one of the problems in agriculture is, you know, we try one path, it's 12 months later when we learn that it hasn't worked and we've got to reset and go again. It's not, the speed of replication is quite a long time. And one of the trials I'm doing, another one associated with Duncan Rawson there, is with nitrogen use efficiency, using data through probes and monitoring on a weekly basis to work out how much fertilizer does that crop need and adjust it accordingly. And so every year, and we're probably in year 5, are we, Duncan, on this? You know, we're doing replicas of fields and splitting fields. One is my approach, tried and tested, and the other is data, AI driven. What should you be doing? We've had some wins and losses. It's quite even Stevens, but that's why we repeat it and we keep going, because I need to learn. in different scenarios and different weather conditions what to do and what to trust. So that's one thing. I mean, environmental data, yes, I saw, I know Dyson have just started with having listening devices in their fields to hear what bugs and everything are out there. That sounds quite clever, and I'm going to be watching that very closely and see what comes through. But at the end of the day, within 3 to 5 years, how much further are we going to be down this journey? We'll be some way. I mean, we'll have a few more. The robotic tractor is clearly out there. 150 horsepower robotic, or autonomous rather, is double the price of a conventional. So, when a price point is quite key to adopting some of these technologies as well. But when it does come to data and managing it, the one thing that we don't talk about that does worry me slightly is the amount of water and power that is needed to run all of these data centers that will be popping up all over the place. If I can have one on my farm, I'd be delighted, but the fact we're in the middle of the fens, I don't think that's going to be happening. But that is going to be a proper concern. We talk about water use in agriculture. Water use in general at the moment is going up. So,
Okay, let's get another question from over here.
So that's actually kind of what I was going to ask. Having come from a farming background, and also I've got a bit of a computer science background as well, my big concern with AI is the very negative environmental impact that it has. We know that it has very high energy and water inputs. So my question is really, as kind of custodians of the natural environment, should we really be embracing that as a technology to kind of make us more efficient? Or should we really be shunning it as, we want to look after the environment rather than use more of the natural resources that we have?
And who are you?
Amelia, sorry.
Amelia. Should you actually just walk away, Helen?
Well, just one very short, I don't know what the answer is, but I think there's a lot of gratuitous use of AI. I just wonder whether, we're starting to use it instead of Google or whatever, you're starting to use AI to do the simplest things, just because you can't be bothered to do. I'm just thinking about, where do we really need to use AI? And using it on, using it in areas where it will be genuinely helpful rather than just generating some stupid picture because you want to stick it on your wall. I mean, there's just so many completely useless uses of AI at the moment, aren't there?
Yes, you've obviously been looking at my chat GPT feed, all my cockapoo pictures. Anyway,
yeah.
but
Stop it, John. Stop
I'm so sorry. I am single-handedly responsible for the end of the world. But AI is already throughout your house. It's in your fridge. It's in your.
It's not in my fridge.
No, mine, no, or mine.
You sure? Have you checked that?
Sure.
Have you checked that third shelf down with that mouldy cucumbers? But we use it all the time. It's in our life. It's integrated in so much of what we do that I'm not sure we can. As attractive as walking away would be, Amelia,
it's not going to happen.
Can we? I don't know. We can. Anyway, I think another genie is out of another bottle. I think. That's why I always say please and thank you to ChatGPT, because when it takes over the world, I want it to remember who's been polite to it. Always.
But doesn't that just use more power? Or is that just something I've read? That actually when you say thank you, it confuses it a bit and it uses more power to work out what's going on.
Don't send emails that say thank you to somebody, because that's every email you send.
I can just do no right, can I? I can just do no right.
The cold, hard truth is, like any apps we have, will it make my life easier and better? And in our quest to be in the top 25% of producers to survive in the industry, is it going to get me there? And if it does, as a farmer, I will be using it because I can't afford not to. And I think that might be the reality when we get down the line in 5+ years' time, we will be using it because we have to.
There is one really quick point. I'll be very, very quick. We do have a tendency, and I don't know where I stand on data. Like I said, I'm very worried about them, but we do have a tendency to think of them as if the status quo is just going to remain, and that tech will continue to be extractive and extremely resource heavy. As it develops and changes, in all likelihood, that may well develop and change too into a system that we can't really envisage right now, but that will be more efficient and better and all of that stuff. That's just a thought.
And one the thought that has come from that the best thing that AI could ever do for me, and for a lot of us in the room probably, is provide a decent weather forecast that gets it spot on. If it does that, I would be happy.
Richard, have you not heard of the Country File 5-day forecast and the Farming Today 7-day forecast?
He did say accurate.
Fighting talk.
Sorry, Charlotte. Oh, God.
You're going to regret that remark. Let's take another question. Just
Hello, this is probably going to come from the left field a bit. But
just tell us who you are. Sorry.
My name's Frank, and I'm a chartered security professional, and I focus on rural crime reduction. And thank you for the bit that you did on a couple of weeks ago. That's fantastic. So, question is, when adapting your farm business, how important is it to design in protective security? And I want to give you some considerations. You need to consider data corruption, theft, and ransom, bearing in mind what we just discussed. Operational technology that would alter your HVAC or your mechanical cows on your on-farm power stations or data centres. Online corruption, retail theft for your farm shops, acquisitive crime for your equipment, activism, and with technology and AI will also come different adversarial risks. Are we prepared for those risks?
Richard?
Probably not on the data and the tech bit. It's barely, it has crossed our mind. We have a sort of a paper at work from a series point of view, but on farm, God no, I don't have anything like that at all. My security on farm is the gates, the cameras, the alarms and things like that. Nothing to do with data, probably way behind the curve. And we did, unfortunately, we had all of our governance equipment nicked a few years ago, and which is very boring and annoying, but it did allow us to actually upgrade to everything's now RTK rather than the guidance we had before. But from, rural crime, I haven't really thought about that, but it could be a problem. What impact would it have? I don't know. You might have to, if you haven't got the satellite to steer the tractor, you might have to go back to the old school way of aiming for the tree, or in my case, we don't, the edge of the dike in the corner of the field. But yes, I haven't really comprehended how much of an impact that would have on our business in my situation.
John?
Sorry, Alan. Sorry. I was going to say, I think as farmers, you've got to treat it like any other kind of business does. And if you're working with sort of corporates now, you will have a kind of a risk gateway you've got to go through, and you've got to have policies on all of that stuff, and you've got to know where you are. And I think that's going to become an increasing reality as systems get more complex. And I think, from the practical on farm stuff, it's kind of red sky at night, the barn's on fire, which we had at home from that basic vandalism. It's getting, the world is much more complex, and lots of other businesses are struggling with the same thing. And I think farming can learn from what lots of other enterprises have had to go through. But it's a very serious and important question, and I think increasingly it's going to be more at the front of people's minds.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of running a relatively low-tech business like that I described my daughter and son-in-law are now running is that there's nothing much to go wrong. That's part of their whole premise, is we don't want all the singing, dancing things, electronic everything, because it can go wrong, and we don't like trying to put these things right. We don't want to start a tractor if we don't have to. So their whole system is actually premised on, just not getting caught up in this whole technological whirlwind. That's not to say that there aren't data sources and things like that could be challenging. But I think the big issues for us that are increasing are things like fly tipping. We're quite close to an urban centre, so we get a lot of that. That can be incredibly expensive to deal with. A lot of the day-to-day theft, and having to just think about always, blocking the farmyards up at night and all that kind of stuff. So it's just it's still that everyday stuff that's really bugging us as farmers. We had somebody come in and steal 3 times in one fortnight the water heater in our calf shed. Now, the amount of value of the copper out of that is probably about 50 quid. They came in, ripped it off the wall so that water spewed all over the calf shed, all these baby calves getting soaked and bedding wet and all that kind of stuff. We repaired it, put a new one in. 3 days later, they came and did it again. So that kind of stuff. And hair coursing is the other one. Really, really unpleasant levels of hair coursing, getting increasingly violent, trying to look at how do we block bridleways in a way that stops vehicles, having to think about every gateway in terms of, that's the stuff that's really driving us up the wall. So if you can solve those problems for us, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Talk to each other after.
Yeah. You've done your pitch now.
Question over here.
Hello, my name's Tom Morphew from Full Circle Farms in the Garden Army. We are regeneratively certified now. We're just up the road here. Just to answer a few of the questions that have been asked, we're integrating AI technology into our composting systems, which is because we understand that the corporates we work for really want that data, which also means they want to pay for it as well. So it's another really good income for our farming system, is that we have all the data that those big corporates want to splash all over their headlines and talk about. So it's a really actually important thing, and AI is helping us get all that together. We also run a care farm called the Garden Army. So it's really important for us to actually engage the next generation and a whole society of people into how we farm. We are completely chemical free on our farm. We don't use any chemicals or artificial fertilizers. People are really, really interested in that and really want to come and engage with how we're farming and learn about how we're farming. We have got queues of young people who want to be our next apprentices on the farm. My question is do you think other farmers and landowners are scared to change from the norm of what they normally do? Do you think there's now an appetite of what's going on and the big changes in farming and the risk financially? Are they now willing to look at renting and to people like me who want to move on to a bigger farm? Is there more interest and appetite in the general kind of landowners and big farms out there who want to engage us in a different way of farming?
John.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, I think so, but I think it's a mixed picture. You know, it's sort of, there are those who are enthusiastic, who are willing to change, who can see the benefits, and those who aren't. And you know, so it's very hard to sort of say, you know, yes or no, absolutely. But I think what is really interesting is that we found that so the farmers we work with, they kind of talk to each other more. You know, regen farmers tend to talk to each other and kind of, you know, explore what they're doing, and I think that helps. And we have lots of sort of WhatsApp calls and various things with kind of farmer groups who want to share knowledge and exchange ideas, and that kind of lights a fire under other people. And I think that's really exciting. It's kind of a community dynamic, and I think that's great. And by the way, these are farmers of all scales in all parts of the world, and that is really exciting. And I know, you know, it's not perhaps going to help you kind of rent kind of more land here if we're talking to somebody in Ghana, but it's sort of, you know, more and more people will be drawn into that ecosystem, I think.
Helen.
And are being drawn in.
Yeah, I thought there were two questions in there. One was about adoption of technologies and are farmers going to change? And I think that actually farmers fall into lots of different groups. There's some, a bit like I did in my early days, who kind of go out there first and do stuff. That's not always perhaps the sensible place to be. I think possibly working out, letting a few people try it and learn lessons and being the early adopter of something may be a better position. And farmers, I think, are quite risk averse on the whole, but we fall into very different categories. So I think you'll find some people really gung-ho for this stuff, and some people will wait to make sure it's proven before they jump. The second part of your question seemed to be about our landowners letting land to entrepreneurial new entrants who want to scale up. And I think that's a really mixed picture. I'm not a landowner, so I can't really tell you, but I think one of the challenges for people wanting to scale, I think losing things like the county small holdings, the county council farms has been a bit of a challenge, and providing that ladder up. I think I'm not sure that it's really there. I think landowners are getting more nervous about letting, because they are, they're worried about devaluing their land. They want short-term FBTs, lots of flexibility, opportunities coming up for things like solar or whatever. They may want to bring land back in hand. So I think we're seeing shorter lets, and I think we really need to think hard about how do we create that ladder of opportunity for new entrants. Richard?
Are landowners and farmers scared to change? I mean, you nearly sort of flip the question a bit and say, can you afford not to? At this moment in time, you haven't got that subsidy check coming in every December. Could you afford not to? Would be my first point on it. I think, the rents, landlords, we get to see all different types of landlords. Some are very traditional, some are very supportive for maybe younger generations, and people are a bit more entrepreneurial as well, which is great to see. And I think, I know there was the Rock report on tenancies and maybe how we could change things in the UK, which does need to happen to make it more attractive for tenancies to be made available a bit more widely. And I know one example in a near neighbour in Ireland, they have a system where you get quite decent income tax reliefs up to certain levels, and then it tapers off from having tenancies. So things like that could encourage a few more units to be made available for people who are willing to take that leap and change. And if there is one thing I have learned is that in the professional career, I've seen how tenant farmers, have to have been really good at being entrepreneurial and adapting to change. Otherwise, they wouldn't survive. And they tend, I get wrong, but mind you, I'm an owner occupier, so I can probably get away with saying this. They tend to be a little bit more ahead of the game than us as the owner occupiers, who have that comfort net of having the security and the land value and things like that.
Okay, let's get another question. Have we got one? Stick your hands in the air so we know where we're going. So, Wiz, why don't you go? There's one here, and then, oh, brilliant, yeah, and then one here after that. Okay.
Hello, Caroline Harriott, farmer, lucky enough on the South Downs, a little bit farmer-owned, but quite a lot of tenanted. And we are traditional mixed rotation farmers. Everything we grow, we feed back to our animals. I think it's great what everyone is doing here, but I also know, having supplied Waitrose, our family farm, for 25 years, how concerned they are about filling their shelves with food from this country. So we can help support the care farms. We employ 6 apprentices and students on our farm. But there needs to be enough of us producing enough food to fill those shelves, as well as starting from the ground up as well. And the one thing that concerns me is, I think, I'm not a computer person in any way, shape or form, but I do think that we need a baseline of what we've got. I'm fed up of being told we've got a depleted countryside in nature. A lot of us are we're fortunate enough to be one of 30 farmers on the Arran to Ada cluster group of farmers, and we're doing an awful lot of food production, but looking after the environment. And it would be really good to have a baseline with AI of what we've got, so we know where we need to go to, because some of us are already doing an awful lot. And I just wonder how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, the need for that baseline was one of the reasons we started Soil Association Exchange, to kind of agree with a whole bunch of other people, including the corporates, what the metrics need to look like, what the methodologies of collecting that data. Because actually, I don't think you can do it all through AI or satellite mapping or whatever. There has to be still some ground truthing in terms of soil cores and biodiversity counts and all those kind of things. You can't do all this stuff remotely or just through a modelling. But I think it's absolutely vital, because everybody's using data from ages ago. I think it's really important now to understand, when we're developing new schemes, when we're trying new practices, how is this impacting? So to be able to get your baseline and then say, right, 3 years later, let's look again, let's see how much improvement we've made, to really give that encouragement, and then to find a way of valuing those improvements. That's exactly what we have been trying to do. And to do that not just on a per acre basis, but to be able to look at that on a per unit of food basis, I think feels really important. Richard?
Yeah, the baselining is interesting. I've this year signed up and been offered a grant through Lens, which will entail me doing some baselining on the farm at home, and I had the meeting booked in this it was before Christmas, so it's going to be quite a tight turnaround. But that is the way we're going, and that is part of interacting with. I will get paid because I'll get some private money coming in, but that baseline will happen, and that's the quid pro quo. And interestingly, I've seen in quite a few of clients that have been involved in landscape recovery projects as well. One in particular, quite near me in West Norfolk, where they've used their funding to baseline everything, and that was what they started with, and then at the end of the 2 years go on from there. So there is a need to do it, and I do agree with you that I feel that on farm there's more biodiversity since I've grown up, since I was a youngster and everything like that. Can I prove it? Not very easily, but I'm hoping with some of these audits that we will get that.
And that's the space that we work in, so I completely agree. There you go, short answer.
Oh, good. Let's take another question. Who's got a microphone? There you go.
Annie Brown, Farming on the Downs. What do the panel think will happen to the land that Valcourt has given notice on, and what do you think should happen?
I interviewed them and asked that very question, so
You
I'll tell you at the end.
What's the answer?
No, I'm just telling you. To be fair to them, they have given notice, which could mean that they renegotiate their agreements with those farms and stay with them, or they might walk away. So it's not that they're leaving 20%, definitely, to be fair to them. John?
Oh my God. Do you know what? I think that I hope that that's what they do. I hope they don't walk away. I'm always slightly nervous when firms of that scale do walk away from things like that. So I just think they've got to support those farmers to find whatever is the right thing for their businesses. And that's a really woolly answer, because frankly, I don't know the details of that business well enough to really give you a solid answer. I'm sorry.
Richard?
Unsurprisingly, I have a small view of this. In everything we practice, whether it's contract farming or tenancies, one thing that is so abundantly clear that everyone has a different price at which they are willing to work. Case in point, this year I, for this autumn, helped tender for 2 clients who were tenants looking to take on FBTs. We lost both tenders, and one went for over £200 an acre combinable croplands, and one went for nearly that. They were thankful they were nowhere near it. But I mean, the reality is that people, unfortunately, do they know their costs? I don't know. There might be other things that are afoot, but there's always someone who's willing to farm extra land for a smaller margin than what I'm prepared to do it for. So if Valcourt do walk away, I'm sure there'll be others who will put their hand up and say, yeah, we'll take it on and we'll do it for slightly less. Now, they might have a different approach to farming it and do it in a totally different way. The number of farms that we've seen that have said, okay, this is, we're getting to the thin end of the wedge. SFI stewardship has been exceptionally helpful from that on lower productive soils. And you can go, well, we used to be able to go big on, rotational stewardship options and SFI and keep, say winter wheat in the cropping mix because that's the highest margin. Will we have that going forward in 2026 SFI? Who knows? I suspect scale down because the budget got smashed last time. But there are different ways of cutting it, and I think people would pick up the opportunity, as I said before. So yes, it will get snapped up, I think, even if they do walk away.
Helen?
I'm not close enough to this to give you an answer, so I think you should tell us what they said.
What the nice man said was that some of the land would probably go for things like solar, because it wasn't great farming land. Others, he thought other people would take it on, and others it would maybe, when we get the details of the SFI, which were due in the summer, then it might go into stuff like that.
I suspect solar would trump it, even if it was really highly productive.
Well, indeed, yeah. Although, yes. Moving on. Right. While you stick your hands in the air for any more questions, let me ask one from Claire Seward online. Where does the panel think the big drive for food system change will come from? Farmers, retailers, government, or public demand? Helen, I'm going to start with you.
What were the options?
Farmers, retailers, government, or public demand? Who is going to drive food system change?
My overall, I think that actually the retailers and the supply chain will probably have more impact than any of the others in the short to medium term. And I'd love to be able to say that it was farmers, that we were taking the future into our own hands and we were really collaborating and going out there and, but I think actually it's those businesses that depend on food and who is now starting to have to report on their carbon and their biodiversity impacts and all this kind of thing, and they're worried about where their food's going to come from. I think they are the ones that are really driving change and likely to continue.
John?
Yeah, so one thing I've got to put my hand up a I co-authored the Waitrose regen strategy, so one of my last acts in the business there, and that came about because exactly what Helen said, there was concern about what the future of the supply chain looks like, because they've got to keep filling those shelves. And we saw what happened in the pandemic, lots and lots of concern about that. And the other thing is that if you're a big corporate and you have to report, if you write an ESG report, an environmental report, and you make a claim in it, the first thing that happens is your auditors will come to you and say, well, where's the evidence for this? So they are driving change at the same time as driving a demand for data that backs that up, because they've got to show progress in this, but they've also got to back up what that change looks like and offer proof. So I think, as Helen has said, I agree completely. I think the biggest pull will come from retailers.
All three can, and all will, but ultimately it's only the farmers that can deliver. And I think if you go back in history and you look at the support into the industry, post World War II, and the need to produce food in the UK and not be caught out like we were before then, was pretty successful and supported to the extent when we ended up with grain mountains, milk lakes and everything like that in Europe. Then we shifted from that to area payments to keep the support there, and then we ended up with set aside. And I think farmers are very, very good at adapting to what the policy is of that time and can deliver fantastically, but ultimately will do whatever it needs to be done to make a profit and stay thriving and stay alive. And that's the truth. So everyone will be able to set policy, but it will be the farmers who deliver it at the end of the day.
Okay, stick your hand in there if you want to ask a question and wave it around really obviously. Oh, one here with the microphone, brilliant.
Hi, Holly Shearman from Innovation for Agriculture. So we're a knowledge exchange charity. We run events across the country for farmers. We've got a network of demonstration farms, very much putting innovation into practice through research for farmer-to-farmer knowledge exchange. I'm also lucky to be a beef and sheep farmer from Sussex. My question is, well, actually I had a lot, but most of them been answered, which is fab. But my one remaining one is quite broad. It's regarding the last graph that Richard put up. Why do you think the UK has fallen so behind the other countries, or why have the other countries not fallen as low as we have?
Richard?
Because of the structure in the country of our land ownership, and also the underlying government policy and support didn't dictate the need to do it, is quite simply the case. And as I keep saying, we got used to having, well, to begin with, it was support on the production of wheat. So you produce your 1 ton of wheat, and the support was included in the price. Then we went to the area payment system. So there was nothing in that would dictate the need to boost productivity, because you could simply rely on scale, area, and getting a big check at the end of the day. And I think that's, being honest, that's what's held us back. But times have clearly changed.
That was the case though across Europe, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the ownership model, if you look in France, is slightly different to the UK in that, maybe a bit sort of generic here, but the the villages in France, quite often you will find that a lot of people have an interest in the local farms around in terms of the ownership. There might still be one farmer, but it might be owned by a wide variety of family members, and that dictates a need for them to boost productivity because they've got to get enough to survive off. Whereas in the UK, let's be honest, as that graph shows, you could not actually make any money from growing crops, but still survive and have quite a healthy income, which is human nature.
Helen?
Yeah, I'm just never quite sure about this whole total factor productivity stuff, and whether we're sometimes a bit schizophrenic about it. When labour is such a big part of that mix, and on the one hand we want to create jobs, and on the other hand we're saying but we're not creating enough value per job. And if you're dealing in a premium market, actually it's no more food, but you're just accessing premium market. I'm not sure the likes of GDP, which isn't a very good way of assessing our economic health, really, because you crash your car and the GDP goes up because you've got to have it mended. It doesn't really tell you, in my view, and I'm sure the economists in the room will really pull me up on this, I'm not sure that it really tells us about the health of the system or what we're really trying to deliver in the system. But maybe I've got that all wrong. John?
I should agree with Helen. I think if you read lots of new economic thought on this process, there's lots of questioning whether, as you say, GDP is the right measure, and whether we're measuring all the right stuff, and the ability of sort of standard model economics to get things right.
Does it value the environmental
does it value the right
benefits
things?
of the farming system alongside the food, alongside the the employment or the cultural or whatever? I'm just a bit kind of worried that this drives a lot of browbeating or breastbeating or whatever it is, and maybe doesn't really get us where we need to go. I think there might be better ways of looking at some of these challenges.
So do we need better metrics then?
I think I'd really like to interrogate the metrics and say, how do we want to look at the value of what the farming and our land management, and what are the things we value as a society, and what systems and approaches best deliver that value for society?
And I suppose in a really simple sense, you kind of talk about just after World War II and the days of Norman Borlaug and all that kind of stuff. We're now asking farmers a different question, I think, and I think we kind of have to find a way that acknowledges that, and to put data in place that acknowledges that change.
Although at this moment in time, it's very hard to do that when you're having conversations where the bank are calling up because the overdraft's been extended. You've got a 200 grand gap in your budget because of the season and everything like that, and that unfortunately
but that's not TFP. That's about profitability.
It is, but it does trump the
flow.
mindset of what you're focused on at that time.
But that's not every farm.
No,
there's lots of people who are. I'm not saying that isn't the case for lots of people. It absolutely is, but that's not every farm.
Yeah, and I don't think TFP is actually measuring really the profitability of those farms and the impact it's giving. Anyway, let's.
I'm just going to jump in with a slightly allied question from Jenny online. Public money for public good, she says. Will food become a public good, or is the only good that the public can understand environmental? All farms, she says, want to look after the environment, but only if we can afford to.
Well, if you had an economist here, would say food is not a public good. It's a private good. Once you've sold it to somebody, you can't sell it to somebody else. So I just think the economics, having just tried to challenge some economic verbosity over here, I just but that it is a private market, and I think we will be beating our head against a brick wall. What we might say, what I think we're really trying to get at when we're saying food is a public good, food and food security and food accessibility is really important for society. And we need to make sure that we're thinking about the skills, the soils, the opportunity to produce food on an ongoing basis. But I think trying to have that public goods argument, the Dieter Helms in this world will have a fit.
They would, yes. But who cares about that? But it's sort of. But I do think, as you said earlier, the link into health outcomes is really important, because I think that does play into this national idea of a public good. I think that's a key link that we've overlooked for so long, as you said, and I think that is needs to be a really important part of that.
Yeah. So food per se, maybe not, but nutritious and sustainable food is that element of it is a public good. Fully agree with that.
So do you think then it should be included in some mechanism of being paid for it, like you are under the SFI when it is working?
Or rather than importing it from South America or somewhere like that? Yes.
Cool. Hands in the air. Who? Just so I can see how many more questions. Right, we should get all of these 3 in. Let's go 1, 2, and then we can run over there for 3. Okay, go for it.
Hello, good evening, Mossy. I want your thoughts, please. I've got 5 questions, but I think this is the most important one.
Just one.
Just one shot.
Don't even try it.
Milk price. The milk price has dropped another 6 pence. What are your thoughts on the dairy industry?
And what was your
regarding the
name?
drop of 6 pence. Mossy.
Mossy. Thoughts on dairy industry, John, at the minute?
This has been a sort of a regular question for years and years and years, way back in my Waitrose days. And I think, farmers need to be paid for what they're producing. And I think it plays straight into that. And I think sort of, if you're on a good milk contract right now, I think you're probably okay. I think if you're feeding milk into a broader pool, it's going to be tough. And that's not right. Yeah.
Richard?
Milk price and dairy farming, I'm clearly not one area of my expertise, but one of my good friends who's part of my Newcastle group is a dairy farmer and is phenomenal at what he does. And we were always so jealous about his knowledge of his business and his costs and his rent. This comes back, the economics of it. His return on capital. The rest of us were all put to shame because of it, but he could adapt because he had that knowledge, and he actually pivoted. He did a stint over in New Zealand, came back and did their dairy herds moved to low input systems, grass based, and it was amazing to see the impact that had, and the margin that he managed to achieve out of it as well. And he was possibly, I know the contract he was on at the time, they had a very open book, and he was, top end of all of his peers on that. And then when he wasn't recognised for everything he was doing, he moved. And that's quite sad to think. And it was not your supermarket, I hasten to add, but another one out there. But he did move because they wouldn't recognise the value that they were putting into it.
Move to a different contract.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is very close to my business heart, because we're, very, very exposed on dairy these days. And I guess, it's the challenge of being part of a global market. It's very good. It's very easy to say the price should be reflecting the value and all this kind of stuff. But when you have oversupplies in a market, and on most things we are oversupplying, going back to, are we producing enough food in the world? There is more dairy than the world's eating, and therefore the price drops. And that is why I think sometimes this kind of, we've got to feed the world, and that is the farmer's thing that we tell ourselves when we wake up in the morning, might make us feel good, but actually if people aren't going to pay for it, reliably pay for it, because we're oversupplying and there's more than enough, then that's what's going to happen. This volatility becomes, just incredibly hard to deal with. So yeah, I mean, we're lucky enough, because at the moment the organic price is staying stable, but we don't sit on our laurels on that. But I do agree, and one of the reasons that my daughter and son-in-law have been so focused on this low input dairy system, this once a day approach, is that they say we can tighten our belts very easily, and we're much less exposed to the feed costs. We're obviously not using the fertilizer. We can, if we have to, if we go through that cycle, we think we can survive it, because our cost base is so much lower. And I do think, we've talked about this quite a lot this evening, this importance of margin, not yield, and thinking about your resilient strategies within the farming business. What do you do if the price falls to this level? What can you do to mitigate that? Do your cooperatives help are you in the right supply chain? Can you commit in and be good enough that you'll get the Waitrose contract or whatever it will be? You know, we really need to think about what's going to be right for us. Can I go through this roller coaster? Can I secure my future by doing something more, by being really brilliant and getting the right contract? Can I run a really low cost model, which isn't likely to be quite so vulnerable? You know, what is my business strategy if I want to stay in dairy? How's it going to work?
There was a question here somewhere.
Oh dear, that sounds
that
like an
does
alarm.
sound like an alarm.
I've got one of those.
Right, ask the question loudly to cover someone's embarrassment.
Hello, Kirsty Speed from CLM. You briefly talked about the carbon import tax or carbon border tax. How do you think that's going to impact on UK agriculture, and what can farmers do to prepare for it?
Who wants to go first?
Oh, do you want me to start?
Yeah, go on.
I think I highlighted my rough calculation was on milling wheat, £5 a tonne. What can we do to prepare for it? So that equates to about £45-50 a hectare. One of the parts of the industry I get quite involved with is AD and biogas, and then the use of digestate liquid and solid coming out of that, which is helpful. And those are the things that are going to start to have a bit more value than they do at the moment. I can remember in the early days of AD, the operators used to have to pay people to get rid of it. Now there's a value to it, and there'll be even bigger value when the carbon border tax comes in, because unfortunately in the UK we no longer make any fertiliser anymore, do we? So yes, it all gets, well, the lion's share of it gets imported, apart from organic fertiliser that we are trying to get hold of as much as possible.
I mean, overall, I feel that I would much rather we were putting a value, an adjustment or a tax on carbon than I would that we were doing that on things like labour. You know, I think actually if we're looking at an economic model, and it works negatively obviously for farmers on fertiliser, but actually when we're looking at food coming in, for instance, that's imported, or if we get to the point where it comes onto food, it could be helpful in terms of if we're doing better in the UK, we're not then being exposed to imports that are not meeting those kind of same standards. So overall, I would rather we were paying the true cost of energy, particularly when it's derived from fossil fuels, and thinking about how does that reshape what it encourages us to do, to be sparing on things like fertilizer and oil and gas, and think about actually how could we support the good things to happen, the environmental benefits, or even, as I say, take the pressure off the labour bill, because I think that adjustment over time, clunky as it will be, makes sense for the economy as a whole and for society as a whole.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it from an optimistic point of view, I think kind of is a classic example of kind of, you know, we are going to have to invent things that work and mitigate it. And I think that's a really positive space to be in. At a time of change, anything that drives change harder, I think, can have a positive upside. And so that's how I would view it.
And just to finish that, hence the reason one of my trials is on nitrogen use efficiency and trying to work out what I can get away with.
It drives behaviour. If the price goes up, like it did, you know, it drives people to think harder about what they're using, and that's got to be a good thing overall.
Instead of just using it as an insurance product.
Yeah. I mean, I think overall it's just so important, though, that we look at the consumption in the UK, not just the production. And I think a lot of when we're talking about carbon, all the metrics are on production, and that's why we've lost a lot of our heavy industry and that kind of thing, because we're saying, oh, that makes us look greener. But actually, if we're using it, then we need to make those adjustments so that we don't just think we're better than we are, because we're not.
Let's get another question from over here.
Mark Wickens, sheep grazier, Sussex, most of Sussex, in fact. I'm inclined to sort of think of farming as a very parochial sort of industry. You look at your neighbours and you look locally within your county and whatever. But we really are in a global industry. That was really brought home to me some years ago, travelling in Egypt, when I was looking at a vast field of runner beans growing on the Nile Delta, and emblazoned around the fence were large signs, huge banners being grown for Asda UK supermarkets. This on the roadside of the irrigation ditch were what I'll describe as urchins. There's no, that's the best description I can think. It's not a PC description, but these children were in rags. Some had one shoe, some had no shoes, and it sort of came home to me that our cheap food is coming out of their mouths. The only reason we've got cheap food is because they can't afford it. It's cheap to us, but it's not cheap to the locals there. And if you're parochial Egyptian, that's not looking quite so clever on a global scale. And I just wonder if by attaching all of these various sort of labels to ourselves, organic and regenerifying and everything else, and sort of minimising our production in the UK, and therefore bringing in food from across the world, are we not in danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and making a larger global problem?
John?
Wow, that's a big question. I think, it's really interesting. If you look, if I can just talk about kind of Waitrose for kind of just a moment, my whole life, that was something that was very much on their minds. If you look at the Waitrose Foundation they set up, which was all about how do you help people in the production areas to live a better life while still making sure that your supply chains can grow the food you need in those countries. And I think there's lots more of that work going on, of that sort of fairly traded work going on. There's a trade argument, obviously, that sort of foreign trade is really valuable to lots of these places. So that's one point. But overall, I think, if you look at, if you were to take it from the point of view is it right just to grow cheap food and do nothing in those countries to mitigate the impacts of that and just kind of extract, then it's a fair criticism. But I think lots and lots of businesses are trying to mitigate that. And I think if you're talking about farming being a global piece, if you look at the Regen Ag movement, that's also global. So there's lots of improvements in ag that are coming out of those countries. If you look at permaculture and the way people think about it and how that's informed the sort of broader regen space. So there's lots of good stuff happening at a broader international level, but you're right, there are still lots and lots of social issues that we have to address.
But given that, what I was suggesting was, shouldn't we be growing everything we possibly can, as much as we possibly can here, rather than being regenerative, organic, or leaving space for nature?
I think you can grow lots of what you need here and be regen and organic. I don't think that's a barrier, but there's some stuff that we just can't grow here, and there's some stuff that there is a demand for, and international trade has value to lots of countries. So I think it's not as simple as that. I think that there are many moving parts, and actually the sort of the unintended consequences of not trading can be as catastrophic as other impacts. So it's not a simple question.
Helen.
Yeah, it's a really complex debate. We probably could have a whole evening on this subject alone. And, some people would start with, well, actually, there's a lot of colonial legacy stuff going on here where we've extracted a lot of value out of those countries and left them fairly impoverished. So, there's a sort of, what should we be doing to best help? Nations should, you want people to be feeding themselves first before they export, for sure. I agree with John. It's not about what we do here in terms of do we reduce our environmental impact through regenerative farming or organic. I think we have choices about whether we produce more. It's easy to produce a lot more horticulture in this country using those kind of techniques. So we could be doing more on that front. But I also agree that the cash opportunity for a lot of countries can be really significant. So it's not straightforward. There's one or two really great examples. I mean, Seachem in Egypt is a really good example of a very large scale organic venture, actually, biodynamic venture, 6,000 acres now. They've, managed to regenerate desert back into productive farmland. They've set up schools and hospitals. They're feeding their own community incredibly well, and they are producing cash crops for export. Those kind of models can really work, and I think they can be really exciting. There are times too when it's probably better to import things than it is to be producing them here in the off season. It's better to probably produce your tomatoes where it's sunny than it is to be heating greenhouses in the winter. So even on a sort of carbon footprint basis, it's not that domestic is good and everything else is bad. These things are generally quite complex, but I know that we will want to continue to source from around the world. Trade is also a great way of communities understanding each other better, so I don't think it's about just saying let's shut the doors and to do it all here, but thinking about what does responsible trade look like. Richard?
Yes, it does seem that, I suppose if you rephrase the question slightly, that we're quite good in this country and adept at exporting our environmental issues elsewhere. Case in point, I always still a bugbear of mine, but say on oilseed rape, near-nick ban on the seed dressing, the amount of extra pesticides that we have been applying because of that is unreal, and then we end up with not being able to get to about 30% of what the demand for rapeseed is in the UK. We're importing it from all over the country. All over the globe, which have different ways of growing it. In terms of can we grow the stuff in the UK, as you said, I think, glass houses we can, and technologies will change to make energy more cleaner, all renewables, and will adapt. And maybe it is that we'll see more glass houses and greenhouses going up, so we do produce more of the stuff in the UK. But it does feel like we do export our environmental issues and things like, shipping wood chip in from the US into Drax to power, to deliver our green energy. I still can't get my head around that.
Nobody can.
But those, we're very good at offshoring our environmental issues, yes.
And there, I think, ladies and gentlemen, we shall leave it. You can't see this because you're all looking this way, but I can see the food and the bar is open. Please join me in thanking our panel, Richard, John and Helen.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Particular thanks to our panel, Helen, John and Richard, expertly chaired, as ever, by Charlotte. We are very grateful for them. And I think, as everyone will agree, it's been a great debate. We've covered a range of subjects: plant diversity, I've put compaction, living roots, care farms, the fat jab, you name it, crime data, all sorts of things. So I hope that everyone's found it interesting and goes home with one or two salient points, but also it's important that you all go home feeling there is some positivity out there. It's not all doom and gloom. So that's great. Thank you again to our sponsors, our media partner, Southeast Farmer, NFU and NFU Mutual, CLM, Lloyds Bank, Mayo, Wynne Baxter, and Richard Place Dobson. Please stay, enjoy the refreshments, continue the conversation, because as we said, it's really important that we're all here together. But before you rise, there are two very important people who are standing down from organising this conference, and we wish to thank them. The first is Duncan Rawson. He's organised yet another brilliant conference. He's been instrumental in coordinating the annual South of England Agricultural Society conference since 2014, and he's always made sure that the subject matter is current. And the second is our amazing South of England whiz, always positive, always full of energy, and we couldn't do this conference without her, but she is also standing down and handing over the reins to Amanda, who I'm sure will also be brilliant. But could you please come forward, Duncan and Wiz, because we do have a little gift, and please could everyone show their appreciation to them. Thank you. Enjoy the food and enjoy the bar. Thank you, everyone.